Tonight on BBC London, a special programme 30 years on from the Marchioness riverboat disaster, which claimed 51 lives. The night started as a celebration, but a birthday party on a boat ended in tragedy in the early hours of the morning when it was hit by a larger vessel.
Before I knew it, I was in the water basically with something trapping me on my chest. I could see all the sort of debris of the broken boat on the water. Lots of people screaming.
For the families of those on board, that night marked the start of a long fight for justice.
I was so glad to be able to have a day when I said they did all of this to us and did not have the decency to apologise.
Their calls to improve safety saw the River Thames change forever. We joined the rescue missions of the lifeboat service, which launched in the capital in the wake of the disaster. Welcome to BBC London. Tonight we're overlooking the River Thames, where 30 years ago more than 100 young Londoners set sail on a riverboat to celebrate a birthday. They were on board the Marchioness, a party boat that had been hired for the event. But just 45 minutes after they set sail, the Marchioness went under Southwark Bridge, where it was hit by a much larger vessel and it was pushed under the water. 51 people lost their lives that night. They were young Londoners, friends celebrating on a warm summer's evening. Their families and friends have been remembering them at a vigil and a memorial service. 80 people survived the crash, rescued from the water. One of them was Jonathan Pang. He's been telling us about his memories of that night. He'd organised the party, and a warning that you may find some of the details distressing.
It was a party for my best friend's 26th birthday party. Antonio had been my best friend for a very long time. And it was a pretty warm, starry night, and we were due to sort of party till 6 in the morning.
But about 45 minutes after setting sail, something happened that would change hundreds of lives and the River Thames forever.
I'd gone to the bar to get my first drink, and a friend of mine called Tim sort of yanked me by the arm and said, "Look out the window, what's that?" And I turned round and I saw this humongous vessel coming towards us with people running on the bow of it, sort of shouting, and then realised that we were going to get run over. At which point the Bowbelle bashed into the Marchioness and all the windows started bursting and we started capsizing. And it then was just horrific, what went on from there. Some people were actually hit by the Bowbelle as it's on impact.
A large dredger, the Bowbelle, had hit the party boat, pushing it underwater. It was later described like a bicycle being run over by a lorry.
And before I knew it, I was in the water basically with something trapping me on my chest. I don't know what that was. And I could hear the motors and the engines of the Bowbelle. And I thought, oh, please let me sort of die quickly, because I don't want to be aware of being caught up in a propeller.
Jonathan managed to break free and float to the surface, where the reality hit him. More than 130 young people had gone from partying to being thrown into the Thames in minutes.
I could see all the sort of debris of the broken boat on the water. Lots of people screaming. Then another friend of mine called Matt floated by on a piece of driftwood, and he hauled me onto it as well and was very encouraging, for saying, we're going to be fine, just, come with me, we'll be okay. And obviously the water was getting colder and colder and wider as we were floating out of London, sort of floating towards the east. And it was completely dark. I mean, it was derelict, that part of the river. Then we started hearing helicopters going by, and they seemed to be going in the other direction.
And he was right. The emergency services were given the wrong location. It was partygoers on the Marchioness's sister boat, the Hurlingham, who rescued Jonathan and many others.
I thought someone had dropped overboard on our boat. Then I rushed to the side and I saw bits and pieces of the boat floating in the river. and there was people screaming, and some of the guys jumped overboard and pulled some of the people onto our boat.
Jonathan lost 20 close friends that night.
I miss the experiences that I would have had with those people that I love dearly. I get very sad knowing how different my life would have been had that night not happened.
Jonathan Pang there. Well, 30 years on, the loss of 51 young lives is still felt by so many. For the grieving families, it was the start of a long fight to find out what had happened to their loved ones. Tara Welsh has been speaking to two women who lost their sons in the tragedy, and a warning that her report does contain some graphic descriptions of what they faced.
My name is Judy Wellington, and I'm the mother of Simon Senior, who I lost on the Marchioness.
My name is Margaret Lockwood Croft. I lost my son Sean Croft, 26, on the River Thames disaster.
There he is, isn't he gorgeous? He lived on the King's Road, and he used to be a model. He's really creative in a lot of ways. And also he played in a band, but he was a great guy and, you know, really well loved by so many friends.
That's Sean. He loved to have a party, and he always loved that. And I loved those two because he just always smiling.
Neither Margaret or Judy knew their sons had gone to a boat party that night.
I had woken at 2 o'clock in the morning and couldn't go back to bed. I was so restless, and I think that's the time that Sean had died, and it made me stay awake. And you just intuitively, as parents can get, I just felt there was something wrong.
Judy had also been awake. She had a newborn baby, Simon's little sister he hadn't yet met.
I got a call from one of his friends, and he said, Judy, can you call the hospitals? Simon was on the boat last night. And I said, what boat? And he said, just listen to the news. We were waiting on phone calls. Nothing was happening. He wasn't being found.
And in Hampshire, Margaret decided to go to the police station in London.
I said, I know my son was on that boat that went down in the River Thames, and he just yelled out, oh, any of you lot got a Lockwood Croft on your list, and that's how I found out. So that was it. No, sorry madam, sit down, have a cup of tea and whatever. I was just left to walk out and walk back to Waterloo Station.
Days later, Sean and Simon's bodies were found at the same time. 49 other people died, including the captain of the Marchioness. The Bowbelle's skipper, Douglas Henderson, had drunk 6 pints of beer on the afternoon before the collision. He was acquitted after juries at 2 separate trials couldn't reach a verdict. An inquest was opened and then closed. Margaret and other families fought court battles to get a second one. It found that victims had been unlawfully killed.
It was emotionally, physically and financially draining. And understandably, not all could run the course.
And there was more. They discovered the coroner, Dr. Paul Knapman, had ordered the hands of victims to be removed for identification purposes. And yet, the government refused to open a public inquiry. Instead, it did its own investigation.
I wanted answers why they cut my son's hand off. Because we were given the body and told not to open it.
Even when he was buried, when he came down, I was refused by the funeral directors to view Sean. So to this day, I do know, because I've had whether it is actually Sean.
In the year 2000, a new government opened a public inquiry.
I apologise unreservedly for the past failings of the department, and especially to the relatives.
I was so glad to be able to have a day when I said they did all of this to us and did not have the decency to apologise.
It blamed the captains and owners of both vessels and said hands shouldn't have been removed. The police, the Port of London Authority and the previous Transport Department were all criticised. Its legacy? A safer river thanks to the relentless campaigning of grieving families.
How will you be remembering him 30 years on? What will you be doing?
Remembering all the laughter and his smile, because he had a sense of humour and he enjoyed life. He's not here physically, but he's in my heart and my head all the time.
The last things that I said to him was how much I loved him. I can't tell you how much, because it just can't measure. So that was one of the last things I said to my son.
The mothers of Simon Senior and Sean Croft there. Well, joining me now is Simon Hughes, who was MP for Southwark at the time. Welcome to the programme, Simon. I gather that when you heard what had happened, you headed straight to the river. Tell us what your memories are.
I live very near. I was called almost immediately, early hours of this August Sunday morning. And it was chaos, it was pandemonium, it was almost unbelievable that here was not just a boat which had sunk by then, but the rescue attempts were trying desperately. People were coming from all directions in a, to be honest, apparently uncoordinated way, literally trying to pull people out. People were arriving, trying to see what help they could offer, trying to get information. It reminded me when I was a teenager, we lived near Aberfan in South Wales. My parents went and took the bodies out of the coal tip. It was that sort of a completely frenetic, desperate race against time to see how many people could be pulled to safety.
And of course, a huge sense of shock here on the ground, but also nationally. Tell us about the reaction.
We never had in living memory in the capital city a tragedy like this. In the middle of the largest, most cosmopolitan city, doing something that people did every night, every weekend. There were boats then as now going up and down. We all did it. It was part of London's normal activity on the river, and it was a huge shock. And for many people who don't live here, the Thames, as now, appears calm and serene. It's a terribly dangerous river. The current is hugely strong. The tides are really strong, and it has always been very dead. And suddenly, people realised how fragile both life on the Thames was and the vessels on the Thames were. Out of the blue, it happened out of the blue. Completely unexpectedly.
I'm afraid we have to leave it there. Simon Hughes, thanks so much for joining us this evening. Well, the tireless fight by the grieving families changed the river forever. The harbour master who oversees this stretch of the river has been telling us of some of the changes that have made our waterway safer.
Okay, I'm Mark Tones, I'm harbour master for the upper district of the PLA. The Thames is really busy through London. We've got 10 million passengers being moved, we've got freight boats, so safety is really critical to make sure that those that are using the river for whatever purpose can do so in safety. Yeah, so since the Marchioness incident in 1989, we've introduced something called Thames AIS, which is a GPS tracking system that's fitted to all of the larger boats on the Thames. And what that allows us to do is very similar to air traffic control. It allows our centre at Woolwich to monitor all of the traffic on the river. So what we can see is the vessel's name, we can see how fast it's going, and we can go in and get more information from the system, such as how many passengers each boat is carrying. Yeah, a passenger boat such as this one here will carry 600 people. That's a lot of people being moved around on the river, so it's important that we keep them safe. One of the ways we do that is by ensuring that every passenger that goes on or off that boat is actually logged and recorded. On the evening of the Marchioness incident, there was some confusion as to how many people were on board the passenger boats, so this safety improvement came in as a result of that. The Thames is a tidal river, so it flows very quickly, twice as fast as an Olympic swimmer. The introduction of these chains after the Marchioness incident give people a chance. If someone finds themselves in the water, they can make their way to the sides, and it gives them something to hold on to stop them being dragged away until they can be safely rescued. If you look at it there, you would not want to be in the water there. Yeah, as well as the river edges, it was really important to put chains around the bridge piers as well. With the strong tides, you can get very dangerous eddies which can draw people round down into the water close to these piers. One of the things that we're going to come on up on just now is another improvement post the Marchioness incident, which is the introduction of 4 lifeboat stations onto the Thames. This is what's known as Tower Lifeboat Station. It's situated in central London, and it's one of the busiest lifeboat stations in the country. Yeah, one of the causes was the Marchioness incident, was that the two boats didn't see each other. These white lights on the bridges are there to give awareness to all the boats on the river when there's a big boat coming down through the central London bridges. It gives awareness of them, it allows other boats to stay out of the way. It's a really simple but effective solution.
Well, our political correspondent Carl Mercer is here. Carl, the river has changed in so many ways since that night, hasn't it?
Yeah, beyond recognition, just where we're standing. That used to be a power station still back then, and many of these buildings weren't actually there. And go further down the river and it's an even more dramatic picture. I came up on that boat with Mark Towans, who we saw in the film there, and we came past Canary Wharf. That wasn't there then. We came past hundreds and hundreds of flats that have been built along the riverside. Now, what's that meant? Well, it's meant that many more thousands of people are commuting every day using the river to get to work. That's made it more busy. Things like these tugs going up and down, still very busy. And we have people, all the tourists going from Greenwich up to Westminster and back again, hundreds of them every day. So actually really busy. Something like 6 million people used to use the river 10 years ago. It's now around 10 million, so clearly a big challenge for those who run the river. So we've got people like the Port of London Authority, the Maritime and Coastal Agency and the Coast Guard now working together from a specialist centre out in Woolwich, trying to manage all of that and keep people safe.
Carl, thank you so much. Well, with more now on how we use the river, let's cross to Tara Welsh, who's on the water.
Well, Alice, I'm on a boat just next to Bankside Pier, and over the last few weeks I've spent a lot of time on the River Thames, and what I've noticed is just how busy it is. Not right now because it's the evening, but earlier on, not a minute goes by without seeing a different boat, maybe a work boat, huge passenger boat carrying about 200 people, boats for all different reasons here on the Thames. And those tasked with keeping us safe on the Thames is a charity, the RNLI, and they gave us access to film there for a few days. Now, we were filming real life rescues, so some people might find some of the footage distressing. This is the busiest lifeboat in the UK. It's had almost 300 call-outs already this year. This morning it's quiet, but there's always something to do. Craig is one of the helms, which means he's in charge.
So been on the go since 6:30, it's 11 o'clock, so I've had a cup of tea today, so I think I deserve some food before I continue on with the rest of my day.
Today he'll be supported by volunteers. There are 50 altogether, and they keep the station going 24/7.
Hello, sweetie. Come on then. Good girl. Good girl. Oh.
And twice a month, Molly comes along with volunteer Pip Dwyer.
I think they put up with me so that Molly can come. I've been on the crew nearly 15 years, 2 years after it started.
4 lifeboat stations were opened on the Thames in response to the Marchioness inquiry. Pip is a retired firefighter and remembers the night it happened.
I was on duty on the land machine. Various spots along the river we were detailed to look for debris. It was a night like no other. It was just, it was one of those nights you never forget.
Since then, Pip and others have saved hundreds of lives, and it's not long before another call comes in.
No tower. Person in the water, Chelsea. Yep, on it.
Person in the water does sort of get your blood pumping.
All they know is that there's a man in the water near Chelsea. It takes them less than 5 minutes to get to him.
Okay, coming up. Can you stand up? Can you help us a little bit, mate? That's the way.
On arrival, a local private boat and managed to get him into their vessel. And then once we got alongside him, we transferred the casualty into the lifeboat to the London Ambulance. Yeah, hopefully he'll get better very soon.
Does that count as a life saved then?
Not for us, no. The local vessel hold of him and then a private boat, so it's a person assisted, that one.
There's a very strict criteria to what counts as a life saved, but since the station opened, they've kept hundreds of people alive.
That was a job one early morning. It's probably the one job in my mind that sticks out the most. We could just see this head visible just below Blackfriars Rail Bridge. Head just popped up that last gasp for breath, and then the lads managed to get hold of him, clamped onto his arm and pulled him in. It is the closest I've ever seen to anyone just drowned before my eyes.
Okay, in you come, fella.
It's the end of a 12-hour shift, but tonight Craig doesn't get to go home.
You're here for 4 days. It can be quite tiring. You're away from your friends, family, but yeah, it's comfortable. It's home from home, really. So I spent half my life here. So this little room is where I reside.
How proud are you to do this job?
Immensely proud. Yeah, it's a vocation more than a job in a way. Yeah, right in the centre of London. Yeah, making a difference to Londoners. It's the best place in the world.
Craig Byrne from the RNLI there, and their message really is never ever get in this water, but if for some reason you find yourself in it, the message is to float, breathe calmly and call for help. Now, the organisation in charge of managing the river is the Port of London Authority. James Trimmer joins me now. Tell us what you do on the river.
The PLA is responsible for managing the river from Teddington in the west to the sea, and principally for ensuring safety of navigation of vessels, and also for promoting the use of the river for passengers, freight and for leisure uses.
We've been hearing huge numbers, 10 million passengers a year and growing.
Yes, it's something that we're trying to promote through our Thames Vision with the Mayor of London, Transport for London, particularly to the east, where there's great opportunities for increased passengers, and also with freight as well. The Thames Tideway Tunnel, London's super sewer, is tunnelling beneath our feet at the moment. And that'll be putting 6 million tonnes of freight onto the river. And when you think that a lorry carries 20 to 30 tonnes, it's a lot of lorries off London's roads and improving our carbon footprint.
And we've been hearing about safety measures on the Thames that could mean that old historic boats have to be scrapped. What does the PLA make of that?
Well, our view is that after the tragedy of 30 years ago, there was an inquiry and a number of recommendations made to improve safety on the river. Those have been implemented apart from one about older vessels, and we think that that should be brought into place and undertaken as soon as possible.
Thanks, James. Well, Alice, tomorrow night we'll be bringing you more from Tower Lifeboat Station, but for now, back to you.
Tara, thank you. Well, if you've found any of the issues or stories in today's programme difficult to hear, there is support available. You can find details on organisations that can help or listen to you on the BBC Action Line. The details of that should be on your screens now. Let's go back to Toulouse in the studio for the main news headlines now. Well, life on the River Thames has changed so much in the last 30 years, in large part down to the events of this day in 1989. Nowadays, we know what boats are on the river. It's better lit, and the people who run the river work together. And probably the major lasting legacy are the lifeboat stations along the Thames, which are the busiest in the country. The tragedy is that it took 51 lives to be lost for those changes to happen. And in the words of the Dean of Southwark at a memorial service today, so much potential, so many plans and dreams were destroyed that night. For so many, the pain and loss must feel like it was yesterday.